to have you here today. Has your organization been impacted by the recent changes in the regulatory environment in the US? And if so, to what extent?
Thank you, Donna, and thank you, the CRTA, for having us. We've been proud members for forever, it feels like, and we really value what you're able to do in bringing the community, specifically the Canadian RegTech community together. Um, in such a incredible niche in our world, we are seeing for the first time in a long time volatility. And by volatility, I mean ups and downs in terms of regulatory environment. For decades upon decades, regulations would always layer on top of each other, and by and large, firms would be responsible for uh, addressing those regulatory requirements with tight timelines, tight budgets, and working groups would come together amongst industry associations. And now, for the first time in a really long time, what we're seeing in the US market is, hey, can we take some of these regulatory expectations down a notch? And that's created a huge amount of uncertainty. And you couple with that this volatility, these swings in the markets that we're seeing around 20% or so on a daily basis. And it doesn't lead to one's ability to really sort of bring in second order thinking and think about this from if you were to kind of use chess, five, six steps down the line, what do I want the company to look like? The example that we have seen at InvestorCom has been illuminating. Some of our clients, as an example, in the US, who have been going through exams, Donna, and they've been experiencing examiners from the SEC just effectively take a package and no longer be part of that investigation process or examination process. And so, what do you do, right? What do you do if you're a firm who's, meeting all the regulatory requirements, doing all the right things, and then the dial from the regulatory side just gets notched down as opposed to up, and then, goes back to that point of uncertainty. And the best thing I've seen across our client base, and we've been asking them the same question, hey, what are you doing in this era of flux, I'll call it? Specifically, one of our clients, he's always very poetic with his words. He turned around and said, look, we recognize that that pendulum is swinging the other way. We know at a certain point that pendulum is going to swing right back around, and we're going to have a target on our back. So we want to do right by our investors. We want to do right by our advisors, right by our clients, ultimately, and mitigate these risks so that you can build a better business over the long term. And that's why they had adopted our technology points. And so, for folks who are sort of perhaps sitting on the sidelines and thinking, gosh, given the regulatory conundrum and deregulation and the market uncertainty, maybe I should just wait on the sidelines. I go back to simple analogies. Is the Highway Traffic Act ever going to release folks from having a seatbelt? And is it in your best interest to not wear a seatbelt while you're driving? Just doing the right thing ultimately is always clearer and a better longer term strategy for firms. And, obviously I'm biased, but when it comes to what we're seeing in the marketplace, ultimately transforming your business with technology, especially in the regulatory environment with compliance technology, not only brings in efficiencies, it just allows your firm to grow much faster over time. And, you'd think as much as we hear things like AI and advent of AI and the automation, there are still, the Pareto principles are sound in that there are still a larger majority of firms when regulations change, they take a spreadsheet and frustration approach to addressing those regulations. And I think we're exactly at the same conundrum when some of those regulations edge downwards or they're no longer on the table. Why not work with your technology partners to find the solution that best meets your requirements, as opposed to going back to the age-old, hey, fill a PDF form and then we'll figure it out down the road. So It's certainly an interesting time for us. Our client experience has so far proven to be more on the positive side and saying, look, we'll get through this market trough, we'll get through this period of uncertainty, and the cooler heads will prevail.
Are you making any changes to your business or product solution in response to these US regulatory changes?
Yeah, really good question, Donna. If there's ever been a key principle in software, and it's I call it the Salesforce software model. They were sort of the first vendor in technology vendor in the CRM space who said, look, we'll give our clients control over the software versus every little data point we're going to charge you for and talk to our client success person. Our models have, by and large, been and continue to be more configurable. So we know these regulations, the text of the regulations are going to evolve over time. But the general idea of providing a digital workflow for advisors to prove that they're acting in their investors' best interest, whether it's Canada or the US, functionally is not going to change. The guardrails may move 10 or 15% here and there, but by and large, the core automation in that process is something that compliance is going to need, the firm's going to need, and quite honestly, it helps the advisors. The other thing, Donna, I was going to talk about was, I mean, it's super timely. What we're seeing in Canada, it was announced perhaps 2, 3 days ago, where the CSA said, hey, look, we're going to put a pause, PAUSE. And, I got to tell you, there was a panel at the OSC Dialogue that talked about it. And it's such an interesting policy conundrum, right? Because the terms ESG have become so political south of the border. It's very much akin to what we've experienced on the wealth management compliance side because of the holistic shift in the pendulum swing. There is almost an allergic reaction in the business community to some of those ESG and DEI concepts. And I'll say this as a market practitioner, um, are there policies that sometimes take things further than they need to be? Absolutely. And I think we've got to look at some of these things as evolutionary processes between where ESG started to greenwashing to all these data providers coming up with the latest and greatest ESG data points that underneath it all, were they ever reliable? To, regulators and all these independent bodies started out, saying, look, this is the way to go. This is the way to report ESG. And then the regulators finally getting involved. And now we've got the shift in political circumstances. And quite honestly, having read into this and watched it over time, it's very similar to what's happening on the wealth regulation side, where I come back to that point that one of our clients made. The pendulum's going to swing back around at some point, right? If there are risks in your business that are frankly, or your business is going to be financially impacted by changes to the climate, disclose those. You don't need a regulator to say, thou shall do X, Y, and Z. Identify those for your end investors. It's just good business, good compliance, good sort of expectations and transparency and communications is always a good practice. So that's kind of the ESG file. I certainly think it's incredible to see a market change in regulatory expectations from, hey, we're going to do this last year. That's what was being discussed at the OSC dialogue to, well, yeah, we're going to pause it, and there is no timeline for this particular file or policy file to come back online. So interesting times for sure.
We're operating in a very complex environment right now. How should Canada navigate these challenges?
That's the million-dollar question. And as an active citizen and a big advocate for Canada. I always wish if Canada could do a little bit more on the leading edge of this, and I think you're seeing some of those initiatives being taken on under sort of, I want to call it leading organizations like Shopify amongst others in sort of putting a flag down and saying, hey. this is what we're going to do on AI, and we're going to be on, we're going to challenge ourselves to, it sounds obscure at the time, not having meetings or standing meetings in companies. I just love hearing Canadian companies take a little bit of a leap and go on the edge and say something a little bit more provocative on that front. And you often hear about some of those things in the US market. And to me, and having been in the business for 20 plus years, it ultimately comes down to leadership and having a backbone to say something and do something uncomfortable. I mean, you look at the pace of change around AI alone, right? Why are we not seeing a Canadian company lead on that front? As innovative, and you think about the pool of talent in Canada alone, um, I would argue we should be expecting ourselves to be a little bit more aggressive, if I could call it that, in establishing targets for ourselves and establishing that, hey, why doesn't Canada become the benchmark for AI innovation and AI adoption? Why can't the Canadian financial services sector be the leaders in adoption of AI versus the other way around? So I do think some of that is a combination of leadership, cooperation with governments, and then culturally as well, right? So is there an opportunity for Canada to sort of shift the dial and say, just as much as we want to be the number one hockey team internationally, can we expect ourselves from youth onwards to be an AI and innovation leader in the world?